Wake up. It's the Sleep Unplugged podcast, episode 157. Weight loss drugs and sleep apnea. One pill makes you small. Welcome, everyone, to the Sleep Unplugged podcast. My name is Chris Winter. I'm a neurologist, sleep specialist, and your host for this episode of the podcast. If you're new to the Sleep Unplugged podcast family, welcome. If you're a veteran of the podcast, welcome back. So glad you're here again. If you'd like to get in touch with the podcast, if you have ideas about future topics, if you have thoughts about weight loss medications and sleep, if you have experience on them that you want to share, you can get in touch with the podcast at Dr. Chris Winter Twitter or X, Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, which is probably the platform I am most active on. Dr. Chris Winter Bluesky Threads. We have a YouTube page where we post all of our video content, as well as a Spotify music playlist where we talk about a song every episode. It's always embedded in the title, and we compile all those songs onto a Spotify music playlist. Today is the third, this marks the third, the podcast now is 3 years old. We are heading into our fourth season. And I just want to take a moment to celebrate. You can see the happy birthday banner is in the background here. I don't know why it's being blurred, but if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the yearly banner is out. We've been doing this for 3 years, very excited, which means if you're a listener of the podcast, you know that this means we start a new Spotify music playlist. So if you were following along on Spotify, you can search up Sleep Unplugged Podcast Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, and now today we will start Volume 4. As a little birthday celebration, if you do follow along on Spotify and you have followed along with these playlists, the cover art is the cover art of our podcast that was designed by our amazing producer, Maeve Winter. I thought it would be fun to celebrate 3 years with changing the podcast or the Spotify playlist cover art for each volume. And we're going to do that based upon typical gifts you give for certain anniversaries. So we will leave the Spotify music playlist volume 1 as is. For volume 2, which would be the first anniversary, I've asked AI to create a logo that looks like it's made out of paper. Second anniversary is cotton, which was a bizarre logo. But the other is china, or fine china, fine dining ware. So I asked AI to create a logo that looks like it's made out of a fine china. So that will be for volume 3. And volume 4, which is the third anniversary, it is leather and crystal. So if you look at the Spotify music playlist volumes 2, 3, and 4, they now have new covers based upon anniversary gifts that are traditional and expected. And going forward, we will always create cover art for our Spotify playlists based upon these anniversary gifts. So that's my gift to you. What else? Just was out in Jacksonville, Florida, giving some lectures on hypersomnia and really appreciated the number of people that came out. We had a really good time. Very energetic audience, and just wanted to give a shout out to you guys. Really appreciate what you do for your patients, your advocacy, your willingness to participate in conversation. I learned a lot from you guys and hope you all had a good time. Comments, corrections, criticisms. We're going to do two really quickly. One was from Shema, who wrote, "Hello, Dr. Chris. Very useful information. Thank you. I am a catathrenic married to a narcoleptic." Well, that sounds like an amazing pairing, and what wonderful way to support one another than for both of you to have your own sleep issue going on. So I really appreciate you reaching out to the podcast. Eric wrote, "For the past several months, I've been struggling with hypnic jerks that occur several times a week. Sometimes they prevent me from falling asleep for 2 to 3 hours. They tend to be more intense after high intensity workouts, which I always do in the morning. A few weeks ago, episodes of tachycardia, elevated heart rate of 100 to 150 began to appear as well, almost always after waking up from dreams, typically REM sleep, and basically said, hey, what do I do? I think what you need to do, Eric, is to get a sleep study. Anytime we're waking up suddenly out of sleep, particularly out of REM sleep, we've talked about that. That can be a sign of sleep apnea, and that elevated heart rate can be a sign of that sympathetic arousal that happens when you stop breathing and suddenly awaken from sleep. Hypnic jerks can be related to fragmented sleep. So as the neurologist in me tries to make everything fall under one umbrella, you could easily sort of paint a picture of a developing sleep apnea that's causing some sleep fragmentation, some lower quality sleep, which is leading to the hypnic jerks in general. But then the awakenings now as the sleep apnea is getting worse, causing that feeling of tachycardia. So, Eric, you need to get a sleep study right away. Call your primary care doctor and say, hey, I need to have a sleep study. And probably this one would be a good one to be an in-lab study instead of a home sleep study, just because there are those elements of the hypnic jerks and the awakening with tachycardia. So, a little bit more of an evaluation looking for arrhythmia might be important. Are you having episodes of tachycardia even without breathing disturbances, etc.? So, in-lab sleep study for you, Eric. Call up your PCP and get that ordered right away. So the music quotation that's going to start off Sleep Unplugged Volume 4 on Spotify is One Pill Makes You Small, which is, of course, from the Jefferson Airplane song White Rabbit. This came off of their second album, which was Surrealistic Pillow. I love I love old album titles. So that was their second album. Their first idol was their first album cover, or I'm sorry, album title was Jefferson Airplane Takes Off. It's great. We've talked about this on the podcast before. I loved how old album titles represented kind of like an advertisement. I mean, you can really see the evolution of let's package this together as a way to advertise these individuals, coming to America, playing concerts, playing shows, England's newest hit makers, introducing, here are the Beatles, and Jefferson Airplane, no exception. Jefferson Airplane takes off. But their second album, Surrealistic Pillow, which I believe came out in 67. I think I'm not entirely sure about that. I think it was 67 that album came out. This was their first album with Grace Slick and their drummer Spencer Dryden. Spencer Dryden was interestingly his half uncle was Charlie Chaplin, and he really worked hard to conceal that his entire career because he didn't really want that to be the thing that people thought about him when his name was mentioned. But anyway, Grace Slick joined Jefferson Airplane, and they had a pretty monstrous second album. Surrealistic Pillow is considered by many to be their best effort. It is a very important album in rock history, particularly in psychedelic rock. Fantastic cover art, and featured I think Grace Slick's brother or some relative of Grace Slick wrote Somebody to Love, which I believe was the second single off the album. The third single was White Rabbit, which was just sort of the psychedelic anthem of the times. Fantastic lyrics. Grace Slick brought this into the group when she came, and it was a massive, massive hit. So we're going to put White Rabbit on the Spotify music playlist. I love the title, Surrealistic Pillow. Really fits in well with the podcast. And if you need another great song off that album, 3/5 of a Mile in 10 Seconds is really, really outstanding. So welcome, Jefferson Airplane. We're going to ignore Jefferson Starship or Starship. We're not talking about it on the podcast. I do want to acknowledge the passing of Brian Wilson. We have not done a Beach Boys song yet, but believe me, that is in the works. So this podcast is coming about through a couple different reasons. One is I've been wanting to do it for a while, but we did an episode 125 was on weight, and I kind of want to give a little bit of time passed before we did this. But when I was out in Seattle, there were a couple abstracts about weight loss and weight drugs and sleep apnea. So I thought it was really important to sort of talk about that. We also talked about the sleep apnea pill, the Apnimed pill, episode 110. And I'm going to touch on that at the end of this episode just as an update. So this kind of adds to our body of information that we have done about sleep apnea. Episode 5, mild sleep apnea, treatments for sleep apnea. We've done surgeries for sleep apnea. We just did oral appliances for sleep apnea. And no offense, oral appliances for sleep apnea, but there is a reason I waited till episode 155 to do it because it's just boring to me. Listen, I'm not saying it's not important, and these are not important things and treatments that we can use for people, and people make their livelihoods. And I just find it to be kind of a boring topic. And it's interesting because I see the numbers of podcast downloads. You found it boring too. So I feel very justified in terms of the topic for a podcast that I was like, well, I should do it because I want that information out there. But it was not the most popular podcast that we've done. So we'll see what happens with this podcast about weight loss drugs and sleep apnea. You all were very enthusiastic about the podcast last week about research that kind of came out of the Seattle conference. And one quick note before we get going, the Oklahoma City Thunder are giving me indigestion and chest pains all at the same time because we are now down to game 7. It will happen Sunday night between the Pacers. This is karma because I ran my mouth in a previous episode about sleep and the threat of danger, I think was the one where I was saying, look, there's going to be a lot of threats and danger and terrible things going through the minds of Pacer fans. And here we are. They have played amazingly well. Shout out to Sean Wendell, my buddy with the Pacers, and absolutely shout out to the sleep vigilante himself, Dr. Singh, who I've got to think is playing a role in this underdog team really outperforming itself. So I really hope the Oklahoma City Thunder can pull it out, but congratulations to the Pacers. You guys are, man, making this a series for the ages. So here we go. Overview. Let's talk about what these medications are. Weight loss medications are hot right now. You all probably saw on my Instagram page, I was in Charlottesville recently getting a whole bunch of medical procedures done, including at the end of it, you can see I'm visiting my primary care doctor, Bill Fox, who is not an imposter as the video portrayed him to be, but actually one of the most brilliant medical minds that I know. And I've talked to him a lot about weight loss drugs and what he thinks about them and what he thinks about the sleep community, i.e., some rando sleep neurologist prescribing weight loss drugs to his patients. And the last time I talked to him in Charlottesville during my yearly checkup, he said, Chris, these drugs are changing the face of medicine. And for the first time since we've been keeping national obesity numbers, that steady rise in obesity notched. And I believe, don't quote me on this, but in 2024, they came down for the first time ever. It may have been 2023, but the most recent obesity number says, wow, we as a population are now weighing less than we did the year before for the first time. So he really helped to educate me about these drugs and really kind of build confidence in terms of giving them to patients. So I was really keen to find out more about these medications, look at the research during this conference. And so, and just as a disclaimer, if you haven't already figured this out, I don't consider myself a weight loss drug expert. So we'll move through this together. I just wanted to give kind of a higher level look at these medications that tend to act on what are called incretin pathways that regulate appetite, glucose metabolism at a very fundamental level. So when you're thinking about Wegovy and Ozempic, this is a drug Semaglutide, which is the active ingredient in those two drugs. Liraglutide is in Saxenda and Victoza. And the GLP-1 receptor agonist tirzepitide, which is what we're going to talk about mainly today, which is in Zepbound, the drug we're going to talk about from Lilly as well as Mounjaro, are dual GIP and GLP-1 receptor agonists. So by activating these gut hormones, these drugs suppress appetite, they slow gastric emptying, and this leads to sort of a reduced food intake and weight loss while also enhancing insulin release and reducing glucagon, which benefits blood sugar control. Now, in a lot of the studies that we're going to talk about today, they excluded people with diabetes. They were just looking at the weight loss effects of these medications. So, real quick, little sidebar, which is these drugs acting on incretin hormone pathways. If you go back to our narcolepsy conversations, we have talked about the chemical orexin, which is often called hypocretin. And you can imagine anorexia, orexin, hypocretin, incretin. There seems to be relationships here between these medications related to narcolepsy and potentially these medications related to weight loss and sleep apnea. So, hypocretin, just to review, is a neuropeptide produced in the lateral hypothalamus. It regulates sleep and wakefulness, appetite and energy, homeostasis, and to some degree, reward circuits and motivation. Incretin pathways, GLP-1 and GIP, are gut peptides. They act primarily on the pancreas, brainstem, and hypothalamus to promote insulin secretion, suppress glucagon, slow gastric emptying, etc. So the potential overlap here, both hypocretin and GLP-1 pathways converge in the hypothalamus, particularly regions involved in appetite regulation and arousal. So the GLP-1 agonists likely influence orexin neurons either directly or indirectly, although data on this is still emerging. So while there is no direct pharmacological link between these two things, the neuroanatomical targets suggest a potential interaction. So it's going to be very interesting to see as time passes, these fields, I predict, are certainly going to converge. And this really goes back to a lot of the information we have about narcolepsy and hypersomnia, the bond studies, et cetera, we've talked about, which are basically when you see people with narcolepsy, they do not regulate sleep properly, they fall asleep, they have features at night. But there's also some things that sort of transcend the sleepiness in terms of cardiovascular risk, weight gain, appetite and eating that we don't really understand. But my guess is we are starting to create a network that is going to come together to kind of answer these questions. And it's really exciting to kind of to figure these things out as we kind of go through them. So I'm really looking forward to finding out more information about these types of things. So let's get into it. Tirzepatide or Zepbound was FDA approved in 2023 for chronic weight management in adults with obesity. In December of 2024, this drug became the first drug ever FDA approved to treat moderate to severe sleep apnea. So why did this happen? So the FDA's decision to do this was driven by results from two different studies. They were both phase 3 clinical trials. Together, they were called the Surmount OSA trials, but there was a trial 1 and trial 2. Both of those trials sort of came together to make the Surmount. These were sponsored by Lilly. They were randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled studies that were looking at tirzepatide and sleep apnea. So in trial 1, there were 234 adults with obesity and moderate to severe sleep apnea who were either, and it's important, unwilling or unable to use a CPAP. They were randomized to either once weekly tirzepatide or placebo for 52 weeks. Trial 2 was 235 adults who were already using PAP therapy for at least 3 months or greater, and they planned to continue to use it. They too were randomized to tirzepatide or placebo for 52 weeks. All participants in both trials received lifestyle, counseling, diet, and exercise. So everybody's getting the same thing. So 469 people studied total. Their AHI had to be greater than 15. So had to have more than 15 breathing problems per hour. We typically think of 0 to 5 breathing problems per hour to be normal, 6 to 20 in the mild category. Long time ago, but I remember this. This was back when I was a younger doctor. We used to consider 15 or greater breathing problems per hour to be the cutoff for sleep apnea. Now it's 5. A lot of studies still use 15, which I fully support. I think it's a much better bar than 5. And all of this information I'm going to talk to you about is available if you want to look it up in New England Journal of Medicine. It was published at the end of 2024, this study. So, what did they find? In trial one, so this is the group that says, I can't use CPAP. So they're just taking the Zepbound. And it's important to understand that we are talking specifically about Zepbound, the Lilly product. In these studies, that was what was tested. Also, should disclose, I have done some work for Lilly. Amazing sleep doctor friend of mine, Kevin Trice, asked me to do a sort of media thing related to Zepbound and weight loss. I did it a while back. I posted a picture of one. A friend of mine was in Huntington, West Virginia, working out in the gym and saw me pop up on some news thing. So I do not have an ongoing relationship with Lilly at this point. Very supportive of what they're doing, but just wanted to disclose that little piece of information there. So anyway, so in trial one, they're looking at breathing problems per hour. And what they found was on average, it dropped by about 25. So if you were somebody having 40 breathing problems per hour, you now have 15 breathing problems per hour. In the placebo, it's dropping about 5. So again, everybody's getting diet, exercise counseling, and that seems to drop people's breathing disturbances by 5. People in the Zepbound group dropped to 25.3. In trial 2, these are the people using CPAP with their Zepbound, a drop of 29.3 events per hour versus 5.5. This is a big number that came out of the study. About half of the patients by the end of the study no longer needed CPAP. That is big. That's a huge number. Because, people ask me all the time, okay, I'm going to start this CPAP, Chris. This is great. And I'm feeling better. I'm really going to get fired up. I've got a plan to lose some weight. Hey, Chris, if I lose weight, can I get off the CPAP? Yes. 100% yes. That is the answer to that question. Now, ask me how many people I see in my clinic have significant enough weight loss on their CPAP. And I'm talking about the best of the CPAP people. Let's do a little post hoc analysis and let's get rid of all of the lesser responders in your clinic and just take those people that, man, huge response to CPAP in the gym, losing weight. How many of those people get off of CPAP? It's not that many. In fact, I feel, and we talked a little bit about this in episode 110 about weight loss. Was it, what was the, 110 was a sleep apnea pill. What episode 125 about, sleep apnea and weight, that it doesn't happen as much as you would think. And there's some really interesting information. I won't get into it again in that podcast about, do people really lose weight when they're on CPAP? And this is one of those beliefs that I had, but when confronted with experience, doesn't really seem like that's the case so much. So in this study, half of the people no longer need the CPAP. They're losing an estimated 16 to 70% of their body weight, which translated into about 45 to 50 pounds average weight loss. Really, really big. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the side effects of these that were seen in the study, because I think it very much mirrors the side effects we talk about when we're discussing using these drugs with patients. Most common was GI, like the sulfur burps, indigestion, Nausea was seen in about 24% of patients, diarrhea in about 24% of patients. In placebo, this was like a single rate number. Mostly these side effects were mild to moderate. A small percentage of people dropped out because of side effects. I believe it was 4%. And I think it was pretty similar to placebo, if I'm not mistaken. What was really interesting was there was sort of established safety concerns about these drugs when this study was all done, the Surmount study was all done, there were no new safety concerns, meaning that in these 600, some odd people that were very closely monitored, they weren't seeing new things that hadn't already been discussed. For instance, all GLP-1 and GIP agonist patients carry a box warning of thyroid C cell tumors. Now, when you talk to people who are really experts in this, they're like, yeah, they were seen in rodents. This is not something that's typically seen in humans. In fact, I've never encountered an individual who's a big user of these drugs who has ever seen a thyroid C cell tumor in a human. So we have to be very careful with how we interpret that. But also, there's a first for everything. So making sure that people are having their thyroid evaluated, touched, lab work done is very important. It's also contraindicated in patients with medullary thyroid carcinoma or multiple endocrine neoplasia type 2. Patients in these trials were screened to exclude these conditions. No new cases of medullary thyroid cancer occurred. And overall, the FDA said, look, the risks are low, the benefits are kind of massive and high, and they approved these drugs for sleep apnea, which is awesome. So when we talk about weight loss drugs, just quickly mentioning again, Zepbound, tirzepitide is what we're talking about, improved in 2023 for weight loss management. It's the first drug in 2024 to be FDA approved for sleep apnea. There's also Mounjaro, which was approved in 2022, Wegovy, Ozempic, Saxenda, and there's some other medications that are out there as well too. So when I started talking, I had a patient who came to me a while back and said, "Look, I feel really comfortable with you, maybe a little bit less so. I like my primary care doctor. I just feel more comfortable with you. I like talking with you better. You seem a little bit more accessible. Like, what would you write me for weight loss medication?" And it happened to be Mounjaro. Um, and I didn't initially because I said, I think this is something better managed by your primary care doctor, I think. But let me get some expert opinion from my colleagues, from my primary care doctor who writes these medications and see what they think. And as I mentioned before, everybody was like, yes, you should be writing these drugs. Yes, you should feel comfortable with them. These are very important drugs, and anybody we can get on these medications, we should be getting. Was essentially the message that I was hearing from these patients. And when we look at individuals who should be on them, your candidate eligibility is generally, individuals seeking weight loss, mild to moderate severity of obesity. We also want to use this as a time to implement, as they did in the study, weight loss and dietary, things that go along with this. So I eventually said yes and started writing for these medications. And this was before the FDA approved Zepbound for the treatment of sleep apnea. So, one of the things that was interesting to me when I started writing them was, okay, well, we'll get patients on these medications, and when they lose weight, they can stop it, right? Or at least it's an option for them to stop. And my primary care doctor, Bill, said, generally speaking, you probably want to counsel these patients that they may be on these medications for the rest of their life, which was really interesting to me. Like, really? You don't think if somebody lost 50 pounds, they could just, okay, now I'm back down to the weight I want to be. I'm going to stop the drug for a while and really work out and watch what I eat. And he said, you can. He said, this is an option to give your patients, but data has shown that they may regain the weight. So, in other words, this may not be curing their obesity or curing their sleep apnea, but be a way to really keep it at bay through an option other than surgery, oral appliance, or a CPAP. So I've had nothing but positive experiences with these medications. Well, knock on wood. so far. Everybody's done very well with them, both in terms of tolerating them, but also in terms of losing weight. I strongly encourage individuals, at least initially, to continue on their CPAP therapies. And this is a topic now because of this FDA approval that I think that we need to be talking to all of our patients about it. So, a typical CPAP follow-up, hey, how are you doing? How's your CPAP working? Great. I just want to let you know that now there is another option for your treatment of sleep apnea. It is a drug called Zepbound. It is a weight loss drug. So, A, if you've never been on a weight loss drug before, think about this. Keep this open as an option. You may want to talk to your primary care doctor about it. You can talk to me about it. But also, hey, if you're already on one of these medications, how much are you paying for it out of pocket? There are a lot of people out there who are paying a lot of money for these drugs every month. I've been telling patients, look, you have to check with your specific insurance carrier and policies, etc. But if you were to switch to Zepbound, because you have sleep apnea that I diagnosed, I've got clinical follow-up notes here. I've got a sleep study that shows that you've got sleep apnea. You may be able to use this to get this drug paid for by your insurance, where you couldn't get other drugs paid for as well too. So I think that's pretty important that we as sleep providers, whether or not we are managing or prescribing these drugs, this goes back to episode, God, what episode were we talking about? The truth about medical practices, it's an illusion, episode 148, where I was talking about a lot of practices are not offering narcolepsy medications because they don't have the staff capacity, time, interest in dealing with all the bullshit that insurance has put up. So this is another drug that might come with it some insurance bullshit. So, but I do think it's important we talk to our patients that look, this is out there. This might be approved for you. So if you can wade through the red tape, you and your provider might be able to get this drug paid for. I think it's important for people to know. I would be very upset if I were on Monjero and then 2 years after paying several $100s a month, I find out that the same active ingredient, Zepbound, is approved for sleep apnea condition that theoretically I have, and I could have been getting it for free all along. So I think that's something we need to be making our patients very much aware of. Other side effects, we talked about the GI stuff, which is the main thing. Fatigue, acid reflux, hair loss can be transient. Pancreatitis was the one thing Bill told me to be on the lookout for. Just go slowly with the titration and pay attention to those types of things because it can happen. Perhaps even some gallbladder problems or gallstones, etc. But generally speaking, people think about this as being pretty safe. The black box warning, again, the thyroid tumors, thyroid T cell tumors related to mice, but it is a black box warning on the box. Caution is warranted in those with type 1 diabetes. Um, and then just close monitoring and follow up, etc. I do want to quickly, before we end this podcast, go back to the Apnimed sleep apnea pill that we were talking about. So number one, in episode 110, where we were talking about the sleep apnea pill, this is a different sleep apnea pill that we're talking about with Zepbound and tirzepitide. Apnimed was a combination of two different drugs, atomoxetine and uh, it's the ADHD drug, and God, I'm blanking on the two different drugs. I'm sorry about that. Go back to listen to episode 110. That basically this drug was put out some more information. There was a press release that went out about the drug that basically said, um, here's some results from their trial called SynAIRgy. That's SynAIRgy. The data was showing that out of 646 participants, they were pretty equally divided in between uh, mild, moderate, and severe sleep apnea. 34% mild, 42% moderate, 23% severe. Their mean reduction in AHI was 22.3%. Just looking up the medication. It's atomoxetine, which is a selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, and eroxybutynin, which is a antimuscarinic. Sorry, those are the two drugs for it in this trial. So 22.3% reduction in AHI, meaning that 22.3 got an AHI below 5. 50, sorry, mean reduction in AHI was 22.3%. 51% dropped disease severity, which meaning if you were at severe, 51% went to moderate. Now, I'm not a big fan, and I think it's a little wanky that, here's your word for the day, wanky. I don't like when people put out information in terms of percentages. A 22.3% reduction in general, I think is let me restate this. Sorry. There was a 55.6 mean reduction in AHI, 22.3 got their AHI below 5, 51% drop in disease severity. Sorry, I'm trying to do this off the top of my head. So about half of people drop from moderate to mild or severe to moderate. About 22% of people are now under AHI of 5. So about 20% are normalized. Now, when we're thinking about Zepbound, 50% or so normalized, just to kind of keep those things in perspective. And again, I don't like the 55 mean reduction. It sounds amazing. Wow, 55% reduction in AHI. Sure, you were 75, or call it 80, and now you're 40. So you've gone from severe sleep apnea to, you know what? Severe sleep apnea. Hey, I've gone from 80 to 40. So again, I think there's going to be a use for these drugs in the individuals who don't want to use a CPAP or can't. That's not a big population in my clinic. I mean, most of the people are using it. And my guess is the people that are normalizing are probably pretty mild to begin with anyway. So it's going to be really interesting to see the upcoming, later this year, the upcoming full report in terms of these numbers. There's going to be a second phase 3 trial called Lunaro or something like that in the third quarter of 2025, and they're going to file with the FDA in 2026. So, they will not be the first sleep apnea pill. Zepbound's going to be able to take that flag. And looking at this result right now and inferring what's going on, I suspect their numbers are not going to be nearly as good as the Zepbound numbers. And when you combine the Zepbound numbers with their weight loss and all the things that go along health wise with losing a lot of weight, as well as reducing your sleep apnea or half of people not needing a CPAP anymore, I'm really hoping that Zepbound can put me out of the CPAP business. That would be awesome. So we'll see. So I just wanted to touch base about these weight loss medications. Talk to your doctor about them if they're of interest to you. If you have sleep apnea and you're thinking, wow, this sounds like a cool option for me. Again, talk to your doctor about, hey, would Zepbound be a good choice for me? Why or why not? Would it get paid for, etc.? And let me know what your clinicians and doctors are telling you out there. Are you having pushback against doctors not wanting to write it? Because, like we talked about in previous episodes, they don't want to deal with the headache and the paperwork and the appeals and the ordering process, the prior authorizations. I'd like to know a little bit more about that too. So that's it. Happy birthday to the podcast. I want to thank everybody out there for your loyal support. I hear from a lot of you all the time, and it's awesome. It's the reason why we do what we do. Thank you again so much. You can follow me, Dr. Chris Winter, Instagram, books, Sleep Solution, and The Rested Child are out there and available. And until next week, sleep well.